Jim Morrison was standing backstage, his leather pants tight, his shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, and he was lying. He just promised Ed Sullivan's producer that he would change the lyric. The word higher, in Light My Fire, would become better when the Doors performed live in 8 minutes. The CBS executives had been clear. The word higher was a drug reference, unacceptable for family television. Change it or don't perform. Jim had nodded, said sure, no problem, shook hands, and now, standing in the wings of the Ed Sullivan Theatre, on September 17, 1967, with his bandmates beside him and 30 million Americans about to watch, Jim Morrison was deciding whether to keep his word or burn his career to the ground. Ed Sullivan, standing on the other side of the stage, had no idea what was about to happen, but in 3 minutes, he would have to make the fastest decision of his life. The tension had been building all day. The Doors had arrived for rehearsal that morning, and the CBS censors had immediately flagged the song. Light My Fire was already controversial. It was sexual, it was dark, and that line, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," was too obvious, too blatant. The network was already under pressure from conservative groups. The FCC was watching. Ed Sullivan's show had always been the safe choice, the family choice, and the Doors were threatening that. The producer had pulled Jim aside, explained the situation, told him it was non-negotiable. Jim had smiled that lazy, dangerous smile, and said he'd change it. The producer had believed him. That was his first mistake. Ed Sullivan knew the Doors were trouble. He'd heard Light My Fire on the radio, knew it was a hit, knew booking them would attract younger viewers, the audience he desperately needed as rock and roll took over American culture. But he also knew Jim Morrison's reputation, the drinking, the unpredictability, the contempt for authority. Ed had dealt with rebels before, Elvis, the Rolling Stones, but something about Jim Morrison felt different, more dangerous, more willing to destroy himself just to prove a point. Ed had asked his producer 3 times if Jim had agreed to change the lyric. Each time, the producer had assured him it was handled. Jim had given his word. The show started. Ed did his introduction. That stiff, formal delivery that America had come to expect. He introduced other acts, a comedian, a singer, everything running smoothly. And then it was time for the Doors. Ed walked to center stage and introduced them with visible discomfort. He said their name, mentioned Light My Fire, but his tone lacked enthusiasm. Anyone watching closely could see he didn't want them there, that he was doing this for ratings, not because he believed in them. Jim Morrison, waiting in the wings, heard that tone, and something in him hardened. The Doors walked onto that stage like they owned it. Ray Manzarek to the keyboards, Robbie Krieger with his guitar, John Densmore behind the drums, and Jim Morrison, shirtless now under his leather jacket, his hair wild, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Even though they were indoors, the audience applauded. But it was uncertain. These weren't the Beatles. These weren't clean-cut boys you wanted your daughter to date. These were something else, something darker. The music started, that iconic organ intro, Ray's fingers dancing across the key, and then Jim stepped to the microphone. His voice, when it came, was low, hypnotic, sexual, in a way that made the CBS censors in the control room shift uncomfortably. The first verse was fine, acceptable, but everyone who knew the song was waiting for the second verse, for that line. The producer was watching the monitors. Confident, Jim had given his word. It would be better, instead of higher. The censors had their fingers on the broadcast delay button. Just in case. Ed Sullivan was standing in the wings, watching, his arms crossed. And then Jim Morrison sang it. "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." The original lyric, unchanged. Defiant. His voice curled around the word higher, like he was savoring it, like he was daring them to stop him. The control room erupted. The producer started screaming into his headset. The censors looked at each other in panic. But the song was live. There was no tape delay sophisticated enough to catch it. It was already out there, already in 30 million American homes, already impossible to take back. Ed Sullivan's face went white, then red. His hands clenched into fists. He took a step toward the stage, like he was going to walk out there and stop it himself. But the song was still going. Jim was still singing, and the audience, who had no idea what they'd just witnessed, was applauding. Ed stood frozen. His show, his reputation, his carefully maintained image of wholesome family entertainment had just been hijacked on live television, and there was nothing he could do except let it finish. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what Jim Morrison had just done. He hadn't just broken a promise. He'd challenged the entire system of television censorship. He'd proven that live television, for all its power, was vulnerable, that an artist could say what they wanted, and the machine couldn't stop them. It was a revolutionary act, a declaration that musicians wouldn't be controlled, that art wouldn't be sanitized, that the counterculture was coming, whether Ed Sullivan and CBS and Middle America liked it or not. The song ended. The Doors stood there, not bowing, not thanking anyone, just stand. Jim Morrison took off his sunglasses, looked directly at where Ed Sullivan was standing in the wings, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a victory smile. Ed saw it, and in that moment, he made his decision. The Doors walked off stage. Jim was laughing. The rest of the band looked nervous. They knew what they'd just done, knew there would be consequences. And they were right. Before they even reached their dressing room, Ed Sullivan's producer intercepted them. His face was purple with rage. He told them they were done. Not just for tonight, forever. The Doors would never appear on the Ed Sullivan Show again. They would never be invited back. Their 6-show contract was cancelled. Jim Morrison shrugged, said something about not wanting to come back anyway. The producer looked like he might have a stroke. Ed Sullivan himself appeared moments later. He didn't yell. That wasn't his style. He just looked at Jim Morrison and said, very quietly, "You gave me your word." Jim met his eyes. "I did. And I broke it. Because some things are more important than your word to a TV executive." Ed's jaw tightened. "Like what?" Jim didn't hesitate. "Like not letting anyone tell me what I can say." Ed stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away. It was the last time they ever spoke. The fallout was massive. CBS received thousands of complaint calls. Sponsors threatened to pull advertising. Conservative groups called for the Doors to be banned from television entirely. But something else happened too. Record sales for Light My Fire exploded. The song became an anthem for young people who were tired of being told what they could think and say and feel. The Doors became legends, not despite the controversy, because of it. Jim Morrison had proven that rebellion could be profitable, that authenticity mattered more than approval. But the cost was real. The Doors never appeared on a major network television show again. Their music was blacklisted from certain stations, and Jim Morrison, who had already been walking a dangerous line between genius and self-destruction, accelerated toward the edge. He would be dead 4 years later, 27 years old, found in a Paris bathtub. Whether the Ed Sullivan incident contributed to his spiral is impossible to say, but those who knew him said that night changed him, made him believe he was invincible, that he could say anything, do anything, and the legend would protect him. It didn't. Ed Sullivan hosted his show for 3 more years after that night. He continued to introduce rock bands, but he never trusted them again, never believed their promises, never let his guard down. And when people asked him about the Doors, about Jim Morrison, he would say simply, he was talented. He was also a liar. He never mentioned that maybe, just maybe, Jim Morrison had been right. That art shouldn't be controlled. That television's job wasn't to protect audiences from reality. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is tell the truth, even when you've promised not to. That night in 1967, with the cameras rolling and a promise freshly broken, Jim Morrison made a choice. He chose art over commerce. He chose defiance over compliance. He chose to sing one word that would end his television career and cement his legend. And Ed Sullivan, standing in the wings watching his show being hijacked, made his own choice. He let it finish. He didn't cut the broadcast. He didn't walk out and stop it. He let Jim Morrison have his moment of rebellion, and then he made sure he paid for it. The cameras kept rolling. The song ended, but the reverberations lasted for decades. That one word, higher, became a dividing line in American culture, between those who believed television should reflect reality and those who believed it should protect people from it, between those who thought artists should be free and those who thought they should be controlled, between the establishment and the revolution. What would you have done if you were Ed Sullivan? What would you have done if you were Jim Morrison? If this story moved you, consider subscribing. These moments deserve to be remembered.